And for the host, sorry, technical glitch, and the hosts that have opened up their homes for this event. We'd also like to thank the staff at the temple where we are now and where the council originally held its first meetings for many years, as we're in this beautiful space in the temple's archives room. Now, it's our pleasure to introduce Cantor Sharon Hordes of Kenneth Israel Congregation, who will provide us with an anniversary blessing.
Good morning. Thank you for this honor of being part of the 125th anniversary of the Louisville section of NCJW. The Torah states more than 40 times that we are to provide for the widow, the poor, the stranger, and the orphan because we were once slaves in the land of Egypt. For the past 125 years, the Louisville section of the National Council of Jewish Women has been guided by this commandment, this mitzvah, to improve the lives of those who were in need of help in their own communities. From founding the first summer kindergarten in Louisville and establishing the first free public baths in 1897, to raising funds to create the Jefferson County Domestic Violence Intake Center and starting a new court watch project on child abuse and neglect cases in family court in the last decade, you have been providing for the widow, the poor, the stranger, and the orphan in our contemporary world. As we set off for the next 125 years and beyond, and continue this journey of engaging, advocating, and supporting women's, children's, and family issues, I'd like to offer a blessing in song, a creative take on the traditional traveler's prayer, Tefillat HaDerech, by Debbie Friedman. May we be blessed as we go on our way. May we be guided in peace. May we be blessed with health and joy. May this be our blessing. Amen. 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 May this be our blessing. Amen. 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 May this be our blessing. Amen. Mazel tov, and here's to the next 125 years and beyond.
Thank you, Cantor Hordes, for that wonderful blessing and spending the time with us this morning. And now, on with the show.
It started with coffee, when the organizers of the 1893 World's Fair asked Hannah Solomon to recruit Jewish women to help out and participate. The men were simply expecting the women to pour coffee and provide other hostess duties. When Mrs. Solomon and her recruits discovered that their participation was not substantive, they walked out. By the end of the World's Fair, Mrs. Solomon and a group of women had founded National Council of Jewish Women, changing forever the role of Jewish women and the nature of volunteerism. Women who wanted to state their self-worth and work outside the home were given the opportunities to make a difference in their communities through volunteering.
Rebecca Rosenthal Judah was a highly respected leader in Louisville, both for her work with National Council of Jewish Women and for women's rights in general. She was born in 1866 in Jeffersonville, Indiana, and graduated from the Louisville Female High School at the age of 16. She married Jacob B. Judah of Louisville, who went on to become the superintendent of a large downtown dry goods store. Rebecca Judah helped to establish the Louisville section of NCJW and served for 14 years as the first president from 1896 to 1910. While leading the Louisville section, she also served as treasurer of National NCJW in 1902 and continued to hold that position for many years. Under her leadership, NCJW helped to run the city's free public baths, provided care for immigrants in need, and supported libraries locally and in nearby rural areas. The Louisville section also equipped a kindergarten at the non-sectarian Home of the Innocents, which allowed Jewish children to attend. Beyond NCJW, she became a forceful advocate for school suffrage, and as an officer in the Kentucky Women's Suffrage Association, she exerted statewide influence, bringing all Kentucky women the right to vote. In response to the requirement that only educated women could vote, they also provided a teacher twice a week to a large department store to teach practical arithmetic and spelling to female employees. The annual conventions of the Kentucky Equal Rights Association could always count on Judah to take a leadership role. She was elected vice president at the 24th KERA convention in 1913. When she was not serving as vice president for the state suffragist organization, she served as treasurer. Rebecca Rosenthal Judah is pictured standing next to Governor Morrow as he signed Kentucky's acceptance of the 19th Amendment, restoring to women their long-fought-for right and now constitutionally guaranteed privilege of suffrage. Her contributions were recognized in History of Women's Suffrage by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. She was also involved in many other charitable organizations, such as the Neighborhood House, the Consumers League of Kentucky, the Child Labor Association, Fresh Air Home, the Hebrew Relief Association, and the Travelers Aid Society of Louisville. Rebecca Rosenthal Judah was a passionate and dedicated leader for National Council of Jewish Women, for women's suffrage, and for our country. She died at the age of 66 in 1932 and was buried at the Temple Cemetery. Later, her husband Jacob was buried alongside her.
In 2007, we were honored to place a Kentucky Historical Society marker in front of the JCC to recognize Rebecca Rosenthal Judah. The addition of Miss Judah to the over 2,000 Kentucky roadside markers remind women, young and old, that their contribution to improving their community makes a difference and has a lasting impact among future generations.
We have been fortunate to have many outstanding women in leadership roles who have greatly impacted NCJW and Louisville. Here are a few of our past presidents to remember. Helen Joseph was president in 1921 and was instrumental in starting the NCJW Student Loan Fund. NCJW to this day is offering scholarships to Jewish students through the Community Foundation of Louisville using the principle that came from this original fund. Helen has the distinction of being the first of 4 generations of Josephs to be involved with council. Her daughter-in-law Dot was a pioneer in the field of mental health after World War II and helped lead NCJW's involvement with several mental health projects. Dot's daughter-in-law, Anne, as a board member, was the California Daycare Center representative and a leader with the Mothers in the Workplace initiative. Helen's great-granddaughter, Alex, while in high school, was not only president of NCJW Junior Council, but went on to be the president of the National Junior Council. Jean Lee Bensinger served twice as president, having the distinction of being the youngest NCJW president elected in 1948, and then again 33 years later in 1981, when she was the oldest ever elected. During her first term as president, she managed the job with 4 children at home, including a set of twins. In her 64 years of leadership with NCJW, she was known as a tireless worker, serving on almost every committee, volunteering with community service projects such as the Jewish Children's Convalescent Home and tutoring new Americans. She volunteered countless hours at the Nearly New Shop and Fashion Encore sales, where she would take on any task from tagging clothes to picking clothes up off the floor. Helen Hellman epitomizes service to the section as president in 1951 and honored with the Hannah Solomon Award in 1970, and then 10 years later with the Henrietta Hersfeld Award. In 1956, it was determined that the section needed to open a resale shop to raise money for community service projects. Helen helped conceive of the idea of a nearly new clothing shop, and she managed the shop for 7 years, finding no job too large or too small. In 1970, Helen was instrumental in establishing Portland Area Senior House, which has since evolved into the present-day senior house organization with which NCJW still supports. Helen inspired younger NCJW leaders by her dedicated work with the Fashion Encore sale. For many years, the fur department was the premier moneymaker for the sale, with Helen taking charge of this department, and was renowned for her flair for modeling the furs and literally selling them off her back.
Betty Jane Fleischaker was an NCJW leader who rose through the ranks of the NCJW organization, serving as Louisville section president from 1953 to 1955, regional president, and then as national vice president. After many years on the national board impacting national policy, Betty Jane was made an honorary vice president. In Louisville, Betty Jane's leadership role began with the civil rights movement and is a strong advocate for social justice. Betty Jane's experiences with NCJW led her to serve on government commissions such as the Louisville Jefferson County Human Relations Commission and the Community Action Commission, to name a few. Throughout Betty Jane's distinguished career in government, social service agency, or healthcare administration, she never forgot her NCJW roots. In the 1990s, she helped secure the section's operational future by leading the fundraising efforts to establish the section's endowment fund. Jean Traub was a visionary and bold president when in 1956, the section took a giant risk to launch a business venture that drastically changed the section's ability to provide significant funds to help establish some of the community's most prominent social service agencies. Under Jean's presidency, the Nearly New Shop opened its doors, which was a brave move for a volunteer women's organization of the 1950s. Jean Traub said, "Helen and I were there the opening day, and we finally made $5. When I went home, I was thrilled to death, and I told my husband that we made $5, and he said, 'All day? Both of you? Stay home, and I'll give you $5. During her many years as a board member, Jean served in various capacities, from chairing the Council Nursery School starting in 1948 to later working with mental health projects and public school issues. In 1948, Maud Fliegelman, originally from Mississippi, moved to Louisville on a Saturday, and on the following Tuesday, she attended her first council study group, dragged by her new friend, Betty Jane. She was hooked. She was elected president in 1957. However, her legacy as a distinguished leader was solidified by her devoting her entire career with council to providing quality child care services to all children in our community. Maud's tireless work in this area began in the 1960s, doing research for the National Windows on Daycare project, which led to her helping establish community coordinated child care and the California Daycare Center. Maud single-handedly, with her Southern charm and determination, was able to secure the first federal dollars awarded to a daycare center in the state of Kentucky. Later, in the 80s, she led the section in helping to establish CASA and VIPS. Maud has the distinction of having her two daughters follow in her footsteps in becoming presidents of NCJW sections. Ellen Prezant in Louisville, and Ann Oppenheimer in South Cook, Illinois. And who could forget Maud's gracious Southern hospitality, hosting countless parties in her home for council and her famous tuna fish salad served at every Fashion Encore sale. Louise Bornstein's first job with council was to serve as the chairman of Singing Messages. Who knew? She went on to hold several offices and served in many serious capacities before becoming president in 1959. Louise may have the honor of being the first NCJW president to have a second phone line installed by her husband because she was spending so much time doing council's business on the main line. Louise was passionate about the issues that NCJW studied. The story goes that as International Relations Chair, she wanted to get the latest information on the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, as NATO was brand new at that time. When she couldn't find the information at the library, she called the Secretary of State's office in Washington. It was Dean Acheson at the time, and she managed to get the Secretary's first assistant on the phone to procure the information that she needed. Needless to say, the study group was very impressed.
Using progressive Jewish ideals to strive for social justice, NCJW has been a powerful force in our advocacy and legislative efforts. The first legislative committee was formed in 1910, and a section began studying issues that not only affected Kentucky, but also the nation. Some of the issues that NCJW has advocated for are the abolition of child labor laws, anti-lynching laws, housing, birth control, and education. Our Public Affairs Committee members regularly attended meetings and sessions with state officials at the Kentucky Capitol and were frequent visitors to the White House and Congress. NCJW state policy advocates were put into place in sections across the country to help guide the sections in their positioning and support of social and civil issues, and to be a liaison between NCJW National and our local section. We also followed elected officials and hosted candidates forums for local and state representatives, as well as judicial candidates.
In the early 1900s, our NCJW members, including my great aunt Ruth Shapinski, along with Lena Levy Takow and Jenny Flexer, were particularly active in the right of women to vote for school boards and school bond issues. They urged women to register and gain their certificate needed in order to vote. The push for voter registration continued in 1914, with Rebecca Judah organizing cars to transport women voters to registration headquarters. Since women were still excluded from certain meetings and locations, Jewish women used outdoor venues to promote suffragette events and parades. Jewish women's involvement in the suffragette movement made Kentucky one of only 4 Southern states to ratify the 19th Amendment. NCJW continues to recognize these suffragette leaders, as well as to promote voter engagement and information through our voting committee.
One of our priority focus areas early on was education. In 1897, we maintained the first summer kindergarten in the city and continued to help with the Temples and Home of the Innocents kindergartens too. The council was instrumental in providing hot lunches in schools, including kosher penny lunches. We went on to work with the school boards for election, child welfare work, school mergers, and tutoring in the classrooms. Later, we worked with JCPS by asking members to be surrogate parents to students who were in need of adult representation at school meetings, and adopted schools to provide resources and needs. In 1965, we helped prepare to Project Head Start in Louisville, helped to establish community coordinated childcare in 1969, and in 1970, assisted with the Head Start project. In 1971, council provided seed money for California Area Daycare Center, renamed Keystone Learning Academy in 2014. In the early 2000s, we coordinated statewide efforts to increase the availability of quality, affordable daycare and trained directors of daycare in Jefferson County and mentored them in improving their programs. In 1987, Carolyn Ballison helped the section create the local hippie home instruction for parents of preschool youngsters project through Jefferson County Public Schools Head Start program. And in the late 1980s and early 1990s, we advocated on the Act for Better Childcare and urged our state senators to support it. We went on to organize a public TV series, Raising America's Children, and sponsored public schools study groups on the Kentucky Education Reform Act, KERA. In 1921, we established the Jewish Student Loan Fund and continued to honor Jewish college students with scholarships through the Community Foundation of Louisville. Just recently awarding scholarships to 2 students this spring.
Children's issues are at the heart of NCJW. From our earliest days in 1915, we worked to abolish child labor laws, promote fair housing for families, and support runaway youth. In 1975, we helped open Shelter House, now called YMCA Safe Place, to be a haven for runaway youth. In 1984, the section helped establish CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocates, Project of Kentucky, a volunteer advocacy program for children in the foster care system. Former Governor Collins stated, quote, "Once again, NCJW should be commended for providing a much-needed community service and a vehicle by which individuals can demonstrate their ability to care for others." The section has also deeply invested efforts into stopping juvenile delinquency. In the early 1940s, our Big Sister Committee worked with Jewish girls in juvenile court, and we sponsored a legislative institute on juvenile and adult delinquency. Discussions and study groups continued in the 1950s, and in 1973, we led a study on juvenile justice and worked to separate the juvenile detention facilities from the adult jail. More recently, at the end of 2019, we participated in community discussions about the closing of the Jefferson County Youth Detention Center and its impact on the children and their families. We also sponsored the creation of Kentucky Youth Advocates in 1977. An article in the December 1977 bulletin said, "Being an integral part of the birth of KYA is another example of Council's long history of involvement and interest in children. We've been a long-standing partner of KYA's and a co-sponsor of their annual Children's Advocacy Week. In 2012, I had the great pleasure of founding the David Reichert Pathways to Justice for Children's Committee to honor David Reichert and to initially study and combat child abuse and neglect. Several years later, we renamed our Public Affairs Committee to be called the David A. Reichert Committee.
Women's issues have been at the core of NCJW's efforts since our inception. In 1897, we asked the Kentucky governor to appoint a jail matron to better oversee the women in jail. Since then, we have continued to ensure women have been treated fairly and equally. In 1981, the section conducted its first survey of women's issues to determine which issues were truly important. It led to participation in Women Equality Days and in 1986 to the Mothers in the Workplace Survey, a study of the changing needs of families in which mothers work. The following year, representatives from NCJW, National Council of Negro Women, and the Junior League began ongoing discussions through the Women's Roundtable, which later led to producing a weekly cable TV program called Images of Women. The current issues they studied were childcare, spousal abuse, and the environment. The section was also involved at the state and federal level. In 1987, we helped to initiate Kentucky Women Advocates, a statewide coalition committed to achieving equality for women. And in 1988, our NCJW delegation encouraged senators and congressmen to support the Family and Medical Leave Act, welfare reform, and the Act for Better Childcare. We were also actively engaged in the Day of the Working Parent, a special event focusing on the needs of all parents who balance work and childcare. Our section has supported reproductive rights with advocacy, email alerts, and calls to action. We participate in local women's caucuses like Speak Up and Speak Out Summit in 2014. We also partner with Planned Parenthood, the ACLU, and most recently, National NCJW's Rabbis for Repro program.
In the early 1900s, the council took the lead in efforts to combat sex trafficking and prostitution for vulnerable young immigrant women. Settlement houses like Neighborhood House offered educational, sports, and social programs to keep young women busy in the evenings. In 1909, the section organized another community center, the West End Settlement, to expand programs and services to neighborhood women and children. In 1995, we began discussions on domestic violence issues and awareness. The Court Watch Project launched to monitor domestic violence court cases, and our focus on this issue gained the attention of Louisville native and CEO of Liz Claiborne. Given the success of the Court Watch Project, the section announced the recommendation for a separate domestic violence court in 1999. Over the next few years, we expanded our efforts to help with the collection and reuse of cell phones for domestic violence victims, helped to open the intake center at the Hall of Justice for victims of domestic violence, and helped fund the Shalom Bayit survey to learn patterns of domestic violence in the Jewish community. In the early 2000s, we participated in V-Day, a worldwide campaign to stop the violence against women and girls, and staged a sold-out production of the Vagina Monologues to raise money for abused women. We also held judicial and educational forums, and under Sandy Friedson's presidency, we partnered with the Center for Women and Families for the Stop the Violence Women's 5K Run Walk. In 2006, after 12 years of advocacy work, the section helped establish the District Court Family Enhanced Supervision Docket to handle domestic violence cases exclusively. At the first annual meeting of the Domestic Violence Enhanced Supervision Docket, the council was invited to attend, and Judge Angela Bissick began the meeting by giving NCJW complete credit for being the impetus for the formulation of this court. The section received award recognition from National NCJW, and our training manuals were requested by other sections so they could put similar court watch programs in place. In 2009, we raised the funds and expanded the Jefferson County Domestic Violence Intake Center, making it an all-encompassing facility. And in 2014, we spearheaded a major three-part study series at the Temple on abused and neglected children and filed an amicus brief with the Kentucky Court of Appeals in support of Kentucky's open records law.
In 1969, I was fortunate to be part of the Public Affairs Committee that focused on how the Jefferson County courts were dealing with families in trouble. To respond, the Jefferson County courts established a family court to look at and help the family as a whole. Understanding the impact NCJW had in the area of domestic violence, and with our success of the Court Watch project in 2013, Chief Judge of Family Court Patty Walker Fitzgerald asked NCJW to launch another court watch, this time to look closely at the children and families caught up in the issues of dependency, neglect, and abuse. About 30 NCJW volunteers spent months monitoring and assessing how our courts dealt with these families. What was obvious to everyone, drugs and alcohol were a major factor in about 85% of the families and children brought to court for offenses of dependency, abuse, and neglect. When the monitoring was complete, a written report, NCJW, a call to action, recommended the creation of a new drug court. Since no tax dollars were available, NCJW volunteers raised the funds in the form of private donations to the Community Foundation of Louisville to fund a 3-year pilot project. The Jefferson County Recovery Court was born. Most of the Recovery Court's clients were addicted to drugs and alcohol, and their drug use led to their temporary loss of custody of their children. The goal of the new court was to help parents get sober and get their kids back. We are proud to be the employer of Recovery Court graduates through the Neely News Shop to provide these parents with not only recovery, but a job. This experimental court is one of the section's proudest achievements. The council was also interested on the impact of substance abuse and its impact on families. In the early 1980s, we formed study groups to learn more about substance abuse and the Substance Abuse Committee was formed. We donated seed money to open Brookline Child and Family Services, now called Us for Us, a center for treating adolescent substance abusers.
The section's work with seniors began in 1945 when we participated in the Jewish Welfare Federation's committee to establish a home for the aged. In 1955, we co-sponsored the Golden Age Group, later called Club 60, to provide seniors social opportunities to gather. In the early 1960s, we partnered with other agencies to fund and open a social and recreational center, Senior House, now named ElderServe. A few years later, we started TEAM, Talented, Energetic, Able, and Mature Citizens Helping Students, which was later taken over by the Board of Education. In 1970, the section opened Senior House West, and our members continued volunteer work there. The section was recognized for our work with seniors by being invited to participate in the White House Council on Aging. And in the 1980s, we established an intergenerational chorus called Close Harmony, which consisted of senior members from the JCC's Club 60 and a group of school-aged children. In 1986, Marilyn Bornstein and I coordinated the planning and opening of NCJW Parkside, a senior adult daycare center housed at Four Courts Senior Center. In an article in the Bulletin, Parkside was referred to as NCJW Louisville Section's most ambitious project in our 90-year history. In the 1990s, we initiated and jointly sponsored community-wide conferences on aging discussing a wide range of issues, including relationships, spirituality, sexuality, financial issues, abuse, employment, and Alzheimer's disease. In the early 2000s, the section provided funding to the Jewish Family and Career Service to create a new emergency senior support fund, enabling low-income seniors to receive stipends to help cover the cost of prescription medication, special foods needed for medically prescribed diets, and transportation. We've recently formed the Optimal Aging Advocates Committee to continue our focus on the needs for seniors in our community.
Supporting Jewish life and identity is at the foundation of NCJW's mission. In 1902, the section established a Jewish corner library at the Young Men's Hebrew Association, and in 1905 placed synagogue directories in local hotels. In the early 1940s, we created a toy workshop at YMHA and began the Ship-a-Box program to send supplies to Jewish youth in Israel. Later, in 1977, we helped establish the Jewish Film Festival series dealing with the quality of Jewish life. In 1985, the section began its Discover Israel program, a social studies enrichment unit for JCPS public school sixth graders. We also updated the programming of the Jewish Resource Center, housed in the JCC, to make the community aware of changes in religious education, and later received generous funding grants from the Jewish Heritage Fund for Excellence for this program.
Providing assistance to new Americans has been an important outreach for NCJW, and it started in 1907 when Immigrant Aid was formed to care for Jewish girls coming from port cities. In the early 1930s, we assisted new Americans in obtaining citizenship papers, gave financial assistance to bring German children to the US, and helped Neighborhood House pay for a citizenship teacher for foreign-born children, as they were then called. Later in that same decade, we established the Lesinski Memorial Fund to be used for emergency refugee work, started a workshop to give new Americans an opportunity to earn money, and reactivated the New American Resettlement Program for Jewish immigrants. In the 1990s, the section developed and funded a language lab for an immigrant assistance program and continued to support the Jewish Family Vocational Services English as a Second Language program for new Americans.
The promotion of civil rights and equality for all was another cornerstone of NCJW's mission, and it started as early as 1915 when the section supported and worked towards anti-lynching laws. In the early 1960s, we sponsored an open occupancy housing study through 6 open meetings, which was quoted as being both stimulating and thought-provoking. As a result of these study sessions, Council's Public Affairs Committee presented a civil rights resolution and a course of action to the board. In 1963, the section received a personal invitation from President Kennedy to visit the White House to join other women's organizations to discuss what women of the United States could do in their current civil rights crisis. Maud Fliegelman and Betty Jane Fleischaker said it was a highlight of their life to meet President Kennedy and attend this meeting. President Kennedy believed that woman power is a vital community force and asked them to study and support current civil rights legislation. In March of 1964, 10 council members joined the Civil Rights March on Frankfurt with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In the section's bulletin, it was written that, quote, "It was a day they shall be proud to report on to their children and their children's children by saying, we played an active part in making Kentucky a better state for all its citizens." In the late 1960s, we began study groups on discrimination and racism. One of the recommendations from these study groups was to donate a scholarship to the University of Louisville to support the educational goals and aspirations of Black youth. The community discussions continued into the 1990s, and the section joined with the Junior League of Louisville and the coalition of 100 Black women to produce a weekly cable television program entitled Images of Women to discuss various topics such as childcare, spousal abuse, and the environment.
The Mental Health Committee began in 1953 as an outgrowth of a council study group that had studied the problems of mental health over a 2-year period. 33 NCJW members volunteered in psychiatric wards at General Hospital to expand its services to include weekly social activities for patients. The program was so successful, it was used as a guide to train other volunteer groups. This committee also worked with Our Lady of Peace to demonstrate how the program would work in a private mental hospital as well. In 1954, the State Department of Mental Health asked the section to do another study on the lack of trained social caseworkers and group workers in state hospitals. Dot Joseph, chairperson of the Mental Health Committee, worked diligently with the section to educate the community and advance support of mental health needs. She also helped lead discussions and study groups at local halfway houses to help men and women treated for mental health to return to family and community life. These study groups led to programs at Bridgehaven that helped ease the transition of mental hospitals back to community participation. The section's work continued into the 1980s with more study groups focusing on mental illness in young people.
While the section has always supported good health and wellness by hosting a series of mindfulness events and attending community events focusing on overall well-being, we have specifically been engaged with Gilda's Club Kentuckiana. Gilda's Club provides a place where children and adults living with cancer and their families and friends join with others to build social and emotional support as a supplement to medical care. We were privileged in 2008 to help establish, fund, and staff the first annual Gilda's Club Summer Camp for children whose lives are affected by cancer. Every year since then, the section has hosted the annual summer camp, and it remains one of our most popular community service projects. We've also been fortunate over the years to be meal hosts, providing home-cooked dinners for approximately 80 family members attending the various support groups at Gilda's Club that night.
The section has provided volunteers and community service opportunities since its founding. In 1900, a fund for Jewish women in hospitals was established, and in 1902, hospital circles were organized. Later, in 1948, the directors of the Jewish hospital were deeply concerned with the high cost of maintaining a hospital and paying its staff, especially its hostesses. Jewish Hospital asked the council if our members were interested, and in January 1949, we began serving as volunteer hostesses at the hospital desk. Their successes led to the Jewish Hospital Sewing Project, which was a sewing room funded, equipped, and staffed by NCJW members to further help the hospital reduce its operating costs. And in 1950, our members were the first volunteers to work in psychiatric wards. Other areas of community service have included environmental, blood drives, food pantry donations, and the Suitcase Project, providing basic toiletries to children being moved within the foster care system. Another way to provide community service, as well as provide leadership development, was the formation of NCJW Junior Council in 1984 for students in grades 7 through 12. The Junior Council was a national NCJW program and our young members held their own board positions, oversaw their own community projects, and went to the national NCJW conventions. Perhaps most importantly, it became a personal legacy for some families as they saw their younger generations involved in council.
An article ran in the 1955 bulletin that said, "Council stands for service. Service costs money." And that statement is as truthful now as it was then. We've been fortunate to have the generous support from our members, community partners, sponsors, and grantors throughout our history. And we've had some wonderful fundraising programs to supplement our operating needs. The Ways and Means Department held style shows. We hosted educational programs and speakers, and we've enjoyed many entertainment events like talent showcases and our Mahjong fundraisers. One of our longest running fundraisers, and certainly highly anticipated, has been the Shopping Spree program. It was launched in 1987 with over 100 stores participating to offer our members special discounts and is still going strong today. We also had great success with the launch of our section cookbook last year and seeing the recipes that have been shared through multiple generations of NCJW members. There have also been fundraising award events honoring community leaders and members alike. Fundraisers like Give for Good Louisville, and many anniversary celebrations that have benefited the section's endowment funding and sustained us throughout the years.
On August 6, 1956, the nearly new shop was opened at 733 East Market under the leadership of Jean Traub and Helen Hellman. It not only provided a community need, but it also provided a source of income for the section. The article in the November 1956 bulletin announcing the opening of the store said it this way, quote, "The Louisville section is in business, a business that fills a real need in our city, and one which can take care of providing our yearly quota funds," end quote. A loan of $1,000 was obtained from the NCJW Student Loan Fund to start the shop, and it was repaid 6 months later. Rent for the first year was $90 per month, and the store fixtures were either donated or purchased from a pawn shop. Approval from the IRS allowed the shop to give itemized tax deductions, and so the steering committee decided to operate a truly nearly new store, not a thrift store, and they decided to donate any items it received but could not be used to other community organizations to benefit local agencies. The shop was staffed by 4 volunteers daily. The first sale was a pair of shorts for 35 cents, and the first mink coat was sold for $1,000. Sales for the first year in 1956 were over $10,000. The concept of the store was so new and so successful that the store grew and moved from 733 East Market to 632 East Market, and then again to a building donated by the Lenkoff family at 815 East Market. In 1975, we held our first fashion encore, and everything that was on the sales floor and in storage was sold. Generations of family members fondly remember the early mornings and long hours working the sale at the fairgrounds. In 1983, its most successful year, Fashion Encore provided $160,000 in income to the section. Fashion Encore remains the shop's most highly anticipated and attended sale to date. Spring Fling was launched in 1990 to showcase the new spring and summer merchandise and continues to be a second largest annual event. The nearly new shop moved to its current home in the Mid-City Mall in November of 1988 with a ribbon cutting ceremony by Mayor Jerry Abramson. Today, the shop is run by a team of full and part-time employees who continue to rely on NCJW members to help process and price the donations and to work the sales.
Now, thank you to everyone that participated in that fantastic reflection of our section's history. It is now my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Sheila Katz. Sheila Katz is the CEO of the National Council of Jewish Women, a network of 180,000 advocates across the US and Israel advancing the rights of women, children, and families. Since her start as CEO, Sheila has overseen the founding of the Rabbis for Repro campaign, building a network of over 1,000 rabbis and Jewish clergy promoting reproductive health, rights, and justice. Additionally, under Sheila's leadership, NCJW has made advancing anti-racism efforts at the national and local levels a priority, showing the intersectionality of racial justice in all of the organization's main advocacy issues.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Nancy. Hi, everyone. And wow, what an amazing history of your section. It's such a pleasure to be joining you for this exciting anniversary. 125 years of recognizing the power of women, honoring how far we've come while recognizing what more we still need to accomplish in the years ahead. And hopefully next year, we'll get to celebrate 126 years in person. NCJW Louisville has long been a leading force for change, from the creation and funding of the Jefferson Family Recovery Court, helping parents with substance abuse issues, to regaining custody of their children through a supervised and supportive process, to the section's creative fundraising efforts, including the creation of your section cookbook, celebrating this important anniversary with 250 recipes, which I hear sold out within a month. And most recently, this section's leadership shines through its Promote the Vote efforts that not only reached NCJW advocates, but also the wider community, including the Federation, who asked to be a partner in your work because of your success. And you already are preparing for the 2022 midterm election to ensure more people are able to access their right to vote. I am just in awe of all of your successes, and I'm so excited to join all of you today to share some of the national priorities of National Council of Jewish Women right now as we work with a new administration and Congress and prepare NCJW advocates for another 125 years of success. So I'll start with our work at the executive level. Over the Biden administration's transition and first months in office, we have built strong relationships here in Washington, D.C. that allow us to push and advocate for our full agenda focused on promoting and advancing the rights of women, children, and families. I have the great honor of representing all of you, and I feel like I'll tell you about some of the meetings I've been in, and I always feel a little bad that you're not able to come with me, but hopefully you'll all come to Washington Institute when we have it, and we'll invite all these people to join us. So far, NCJW and our headquarters, we've met with Vice President Harris to discuss equal pay. We've met with Second Gentleman Emhoff to discuss childcare and reproductive access. We've met with Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas to discuss conditions for refugees and immigrants at the border. We've met with Secretary of State Blinken about equity in Israel. And we helped form the new Gender Policy Council, which helps infuse gender and racial justice throughout the entirety of the White House and government. Our collective power through organizing and lobbying, both locally and nationally, allowed us to accomplish 9 out of our 10 priorities that we set forth from the day President Biden was sworn in for his first 100 days. And recently, we were able to check off that final 10th box when the Biden administration submitted a budget without the discriminatory Hyde Amendment that limits access to abortion. So we did it. We accomplished 10 out of 10 of the things that we set forth to accomplish. And obviously, we celebrate, we're excited, and now we come up with a new list and push those things forward. We've also leveraged our influence to ensure the confirmations of both Vanita Gupta and Kristen Clark into key roles in the Department of Justice, and they were both confirmed and now will be serving as our main partners in fighting hate in this country. As we're reflecting on this past year, particularly around COVID, as you already know, women were hit hardest, and women of color in particular. Women were more likely to lose their jobs, women were most impacted by lack of childcare, and as a result left the workforce in record numbers. According to a recent poll, we moved in 1 year back to the numbers of women in the workplace from 1988. So we have a lot of work to do to figure out how to get women caught up from where we were and to have true equity. And we know that childcare is equally critical to our country's infrastructure as building bridges are. Supports like paid family leave, strong childcare systems, and programs to help women are critical to stem the flow of women exiting the labor force and ensure they're able to fully participate in our economic recovery. And that's why we've been so active in working with the Biden administration on the recently announced American Families Plan and the American Jobs Plan, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to rebuild our country and our economy, not just to where we were before the pandemic, but to a place where it is inclusive and responsive to the needs of everyone living in this country. And it includes vital funding for programs that we advocated for, including family leave, including childcare, and just to make sure that we can not just exist in this changing world, but thrive in the changing environment. And so I also have to mention, particularly as the Supreme Court has evolved and changed in this past year, that we know that 2021 is the pivotal year for protecting access to abortion and affordable health care. Roe v. Wade is under attack and could be overturned 1 year from now in the Supreme Court, which is like daunting to continue to say out loud. So we're pushing Congress and the administration to codify legal abortion through legislation. And this includes the reintroduction just last week of the Women's Health Protection Act, which the acronym, a lot of people refer to it as WHPA, WHPA, which is a critical piece of legislation that would increase access to healthcare, including abortion, and the passage of the EACH Act that would end the discriminatory Hyde Amendment for good. And so NCJW recognizes the need for Jewish moral leadership to speak out for reproductive health rights and justice, which is why we launched the Rabbis for Repro campaign as a way for Jewish clergy to speak up for reproductive rights. And as Nancy mentioned, more than 1,000 Jewish clergy in 45 states, including Kentucky, have signed the pledge. And most recently, at our first ever Jewish Clergy Lobby Day, after just 1 day of meetings, our Rabbis for Repro helped secure 36 new Congress signatures to the Women's Health Protection Act and the EACH Act, which is really, really amazing. So in Judaism, we believe people should have full control of their bodies, and that doesn't change with reproductive health. Reproductive health care, including abortion, is health care, plain and simple. It's a religious freedom issue, and it's also an issue of dignity and compassion. And just as I'm closing, I'd be remiss if I didn't also underscore the intersection of racial justice in all the national priorities I've already listed. Systemic racism impacts every facet of the work we do, from reproductive health rights and justice to civil rights to voter rights. Your hometown was the hometown of Breonna Taylor, a woman whose name we will never forget, and so many others whose names didn't make the headlines. In her name and in the names of all of those whose lives have been taken due to systemic racism, we will continue to do the work both internally as an organization, as well as pushing our country towards racial justice. And I know the path ahead may be daunting as we start to grapple what this post-pandemic world will look like, but you're already doing it. You're here. You're making a commitment to support your section into the next era, and you're working to make our shared mission a reality. As a community, and in particular as Jewish women, we've made significant contributions to combat COVID-19, increase voter access, and address gender and racial inequities. And while there's still so much work to do, National Council of Jewish Women, and myself in particular, I'm so excited and proud to be in this fight with all of you. And we look forward to achieving great things together in the next 125 years. Thank you so much for having me today as part of your celebration. And thank you to your leadership. You have outstanding folks from your section that we're lucky enough to work with. And I'm grateful for each of you and the dedication you make every day.
that inspiring. Thank you, Sheila, for that inspiring message and for joining us all today. We are also grateful to share the following congratulatory remarks from some of our elected officials.
Hi, everyone. This is Andy and Brittany, and we are honored to be joining you.
Congratulations to you, the Louisville section of the National Council of Jewish Women, on reaching 125 years. This is such a significant milestone, not only for the organization, but for those who benefit from your service.
You work to bring social justice by improving the lives of women, children, and families within Louisville, our Commonwealth, and our country. Your mission perfectly aligns with my work as governor. The well-being, rights, and health of our people will always be a top priority.
Through the years, NCJW has helped promote equal pay, voting, and healthcare rights for women. The work done has given us, as women, a seat at the table, a seat we deserve. And I know the impact will continue far beyond this 125 years, further making our world more just and equal for women and others.
You're helping us build a better Kentucky for all. Today, we celebrate you and your dedication, compassion, and selflessness. Thank you and congratulations.
Hi, I'm Congressman John Yarmouth, and I'm so glad to have this opportunity to acknowledge 125 years of tireless work for social justice by the Louisville chapter of the National Council of Jewish Women. Each one of you and everyone who preceded you and who will follow you deserves our praise and thanks for laboring so hard on behalf of our fellow human beings. You haven't just honored the mandate of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, you've breathed it. You breathe it every day, and for that, we can never say thanks enough. Unfortunately, what we know, particularly from the last few years, is that this work never ends. I know that you should stand on your laurels for the work you've done for 125 years, but I'm afraid we're going to need you to stick around for the next 125 as well. I know you will, and those who follow you will, and continue to do this outstanding work that is so vital to make sure that we have the kind of world that we all want to live in. Thanks again.
We thank the Governor and First Lady Beshear and Congressman Yarmouth for taking the time to recognize our section. And as we celebrate what the section has accomplished these past 125 years, we're also excited about our recent efforts to re-energize and revitalize our members and our work. We invite you to join us this evening with your family and friends at the Big Four Walking Bridge. Our special guests include Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman, Representative Nima Kulkarni, Councilwoman Cassie Chambers Armstrong, the Louisville Metro Office for Women Director Tina Ward Pugh, Heaven Hill Brands Chief Marketing Officer Kate Latz, and NCJW Past President Jane Emke. We encourage you to walk with us on the bridge as we ceremoniously walk towards our future. And as the sun begins to set, we'll end our day of celebration by watching the bridge light up in NCJW colors.
Thank you to all the participants and guests for honoring us with your involvement in this presentation. Thank you to the many generous sponsors and donors who supported the anniversary events and our mission to improve the quality of life for women, children, and families in Louisville. We are especially grateful to our title sponsors, Heaven Hill Brands and Jane and Bert Emke, for their major support, and to Heaven Hill's creative team for their assistance with this presentation, and to the Temple for allowing us to use their beautiful building for this presentation. Thank you to the 125th Anniversary Committee members for their time and enthusiasm in planning our celebration. Nancy Chazen, Jamie Ingram, Abby Glogauer, Sarika Kulkarni, Ellen Rosenblum, Ellen Shapira, Judy Shapira, and Elaine Weidberg. See you tonight.
Thanks everyone for joining us. We appreciate your time. We hope you enjoy your lunches, and we'll see you tonight at the bridge. And please don't forget to bring down some items to donate to homeless youth. And we'll see you tonight. Thanks everybody. Thanks, Jamie.